Story 1. My best friend cheated on her fiancé during her bachelorette party, but when I told her she needed to admit what she did, she threatened to expose my past to my new boyfriend. It was my best friend Olivia's bachelorette party, and I couldn't have been happier for her. She was finally marrying her longtime boyfriend Derek, who happened to be my older cousin. As her maid of honor, I was responsible for making sure everything went perfectly. But what unfolded during that weekend getaway would shatter everything I thought I knew about my closest friend. Olivia had rented this massive beach house for the celebration. She told Derek it would just be us girls having spa days and wine nights. But on the very first evening, a group of male strippers showed up. I thought it was just going to be some harmless entertainment, maybe some dancing and laughs. I was so wrong. Throughout the entire weekend, I watched in horror as Olivia disappeared into bedrooms with each one of them. Not just once, but multiple times with multiple guys. On our last night there, I couldn't stay silent anymore. I pulled her aside on the deck overlooking the ocean and confronted her directly. "Olivia, what are you doing? You're getting married in 3 weeks." She looked at me with cold, calculated eyes and said something that made my blood run cold. "If you say one word to Derek about this, I'll make sure your boyfriend Ethan finds out about your little escort phase in college." She knew about the year I'd worked as a high-end companion to pay off my student loans, something I'd buried deep in my past and never told Ethan about. When we returned home, Derek was waiting at the airport with flowers for Olivia. His face lit up when he saw her, asking all about our trip. Olivia smiled brightly and described imaginary spa treatments and beach yoga sessions, going into elaborate detail about things that never happened. She talked about how much she bonded with all the bridesmaids and how it was exactly what she needed before the wedding. Derek hung on every word, completely trusting her. My stomach churned watching this performance. I made an excuse about jet lag and left quickly. The following days were absolute agony. Olivia and I had scheduled meetings about wedding details, finalizing the seating chart, confirming with the caterer, picking up her dress for the final fitting. Every single time I looked at her smiling face, I saw those men going in and out of her bedroom. The images haunted me constantly. I barely slept. I knew Derek deserved to know the truth, but without any evidence, how could I prove what happened? And Olivia's threat hung over me like a sword. One word from her could destroy my relationship with Ethan, who came from a very traditional family. I realized I needed concrete proof. I needed her to admit it in her own words. So I arranged to meet Olivia at this new sushi restaurant that had just opened near my place. I set my phone on the table between us, camera facing slightly toward her, and pretended I was just keeping it nearby. We ordered sake and started catching up like we always did. The conversation flowed naturally, discussing work drama, complaining about difficult relatives, talking about honeymoon destinations. Then I carefully brought up the beach house weekend. "Do you think you and Derek should honeymoon somewhere tropical like where we stayed?" Olivia's face brightened. "Absolutely. That beach was incredible, and the nightlife was amazing." I laughed conspiratorially. Speaking of nightlife, one of the other bridesmaids got that one dancer's Instagram. She's been messaging him. Olivia leaned in with interest. "Really? Which one?" I shrugged casually. "The one with the dark hair and the six-pack. She's thinking about flying out to see him." Olivia giggled and lowered her voice. "Honestly, I wouldn't blame her. That guy knew exactly what he was doing." I pushed further, keeping my tone playful. "Better than the others?" She didn't even pause. "Way better. The blonde one was okay, and the tall one was pretty good, but the dark-haired guy, I'd rank him a solid 10 out of 10. Best I've ever had, if I'm being honest." We both laughed, and I pretended to reach for my drink while subtly adjusting my phone angle. We continued chatting for another 20 minutes before the waiter brought our check. The second I got into my car, I called Derek. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. "I need to see you immediately. Come to my apartment. Don't mention this to Olivia." I could hear the worry in his voice. "What's going on? Is something wrong?" I told him I'd explain everything when he got there and hung up before he could ask more questions. Derek arrived within 45 minutes, knocking urgently on my door. I let him in, and we sat on my couch. My hands were shaking as I pulled up the video on my phone. "You need to watch this. I'm so sorry." I pressed play, and watched Derek's entire world crumble. His face went from confused to shocked to devastated within seconds. When the video ended, he just sat there staring at nothing. Finally, he spoke. "She told me it was the best weekend of her life. She showed me pictures of you all at the beach. She said she felt so lucky to have such amazing friends." His voice cracked. I explained why I'd waited, the blackmail, needing proof, wanting to protect both of us. Derek put his head in his hands. My own cousin had to be the one to tell me this. I feel like such an idiot. I grabbed his shoulder. "You're not an idiot. She's just a really good liar." We sat in silence for several minutes before Derek looked up at me with determination in his eyes. "I'm calling off the wedding, but I can't tell her you told me. If she finds out, she'll ruin your life too." I nodded, relieved he understood. 2.5 weeks before the wedding, my phone exploded with calls from Olivia. When I finally answered, she was hysterical, screaming and sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. "He ended it! Derek ended everything!" she wailed. I asked what happened, playing dumb. Through her tears, she explained that Derek had found some compromising messages on her phone and confronted her about cheating. He wouldn't even discuss it, just said they were done and walked out. "Do you think there's someone else?" she asked desperately. I told her I hadn't heard anything about another woman, that Derek had seemed completely committed to her. This made her cry even harder. For a brief moment, I actually felt guilty. Despite everything she'd done, hearing her in such pain was difficult. Over the next several months, Olivia practically lived at my place. She'd show up unannounced, spend entire days on my couch in her pajamas, crying through boxes of tissues. I tried being supportive, buying her favorite chocolate, suggesting we watch comedies, taking her out for walks. But it's amazing how many TV shows and movies feature happy couples when you're trying to avoid that exact topic. I listened to her vent for hours about how much she missed Derek, how she'd messed up, how she wished she could go back and change everything. One evening, she begged me to talk to Derek on her behalf. "You're his cousin. He'll listen to you. Please, just ask him to give me another chance." I shook my head firmly. "Olivia, he was heartbroken. Some things you can't come back from." She started crying again, saying she'd learned her lesson and would never make the same mistake twice. I reminded her that actions have consequences. After about 4 months of this routine, Olivia finally moved back to her own apartment. She still visited twice a week, but I noticed she was gradually improving. She'd started going to therapy, had gotten a promotion at work, and was even talking about maybe trying to date again eventually. I was genuinely glad to see her healing, even though I knew the secret I was carrying. Things were going well in my own life too. Ethan and I had gotten even closer through all of this. One Saturday night, he took me to this upscale Italian restaurant downtown. We'd just finished our main courses when the waiter brought out a dessert I hadn't ordered, a chocolate lava cake with "Will you marry me?" written in raspberry sauce on the plate. I looked up in confusion, and Ethan was already kneeling beside the table, holding a velvet box with a stunning ring inside. I couldn't breathe. Tears immediately started streaming down my face as I nodded yes over and over. He slipped the ring on my finger and kissed me while the entire restaurant applauded. I'd never been so happy in my entire life. When we got home that night, I called Derek to share the news. He was thrilled for me, saying I deserved all the happiness in the world. We agreed to meet for coffee the next day to celebrate properly. At the coffee shop, Derek and I caught up on everything happening in our lives. He congratulated me again on the engagement, telling me how lucky I was to find someone as genuine and loving as Ethan, unlike his ex-fiancée. I laughed and agreed wholeheartedly. "Honestly, you dodged a major bullet with Olivia," I said. He smiled sadly. "Thanks to you. You saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. That recording was genius, by the way. I don't think I would have believed it otherwise. I was too blind." We spent the rest of the afternoon talking and laughing, and I was relieved to see him genuinely doing better. The wedding planning took over my life for the next several months. Despite everything that had happened, I felt obligated to ask Olivia if she wanted to help, since we were still supposedly best friends. When I brought it up nervously, she practically screamed with excitement. "Are you kidding? Of course I want to help. This is going to be amazing." Her enthusiasm surprised me, but I figured it meant she was truly moving forward. Olivia threw herself into helping with every detail. We toured venues together, sampled dozens of cakes, debated between color schemes, and spent hours on Pinterest looking at decoration ideas. I had to admit, having her involved made the process more fun. She seemed genuinely invested in making sure my day was perfect. Planning my own wedding felt completely different than planning hers had. This time, I was filled with pure excitement instead of dread. One afternoon, Olivia suggested we grab lunch at this trendy bistro that had just opened downtown. When I arrived, she handed me a gift bag with a huge smile. Inside was a custom caricature drawing of me and Ethan, those exaggerated cartoon portraits with giant heads and tiny bodies. The artist had given me enormous eyes and Ethan a ridiculously oversized smile. I burst out laughing. "Where did you even find someone to make this?" She grinned mischievously. "I have connections. Isn't it perfect? You should definitely frame it and hang it in your bedroom." I told her it would definitely go somewhere, though I wasn't sure where exactly yet. We ordered the same lunch specials and talked about wedding logistics. Olivia asked if I was nervous about anything. I hesitated, then admitted I still hadn't told Ethan about my past as an escort and was worried about how he'd react. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "If he really loves you, it won't matter. Your past doesn't define who you are now." I appreciated her support and felt grateful to have her back in my corner. The wedding day finally arrived. I stood in the bridal suite, wearing my dream dress, feeling like I was floating on air. Olivia, as my maid of honor, helped adjust my veil and kept telling me how beautiful I looked. The music started, and I walked down the aisle toward Ethan, who had tears in his eyes. Our families and friends smiled at us from their seats. Everything was absolutely perfect. The officiant began the ceremony, speaking about love and commitment. Then he asked the traditional question: "If anyone objects to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace." I expected silence, maybe a nervous laugh from someone. Instead, I heard a voice behind me say, "I object." I actually laughed, thinking it was a joke. But when I turned around, I saw Olivia standing there with a serious expression I'd never seen before. "I'm not joking," she said loudly. The entire room gasped. I felt my heart stop. "Olivia, what are you doing?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. She looked directly at me with cold eyes. "I know what you did. I know you're the reason Derek left me." The room erupted in confused murmurs. I stood frozen, feeling the blood drain from my face. "I overheard you and Derek talking months ago," Olivia continued, her voice steady and clear. "You confessed to recording our conversation at that sushi restaurant. You set me up." I tried to deny it, stammering that I had no idea what she was talking about, but sweat was already forming on my forehead, and my voice sounded guilty even to my own ears. Then Olivia turned to Ethan, who was staring at both of us in complete confusion. "And since we're sharing secrets today, I think you should know about your bride's past career. Emily spent a year working as a paid escort during college. She never told you because she knew you'd leave her." My vision started tunneling. The room was spinning, but Olivia wasn't finished. She walked toward Ethan with a twisted smile and dropped the final bomb. "Oh, and Ethan and I have been sleeping together for the past 8 months. This was our plan all along. I get my revenge on Emily, and we get to be together." She grabbed Ethan and kissed him right there in front of everyone. "If anyone's getting married today, it should be us." The room exploded in chaos. People were standing, shouting, gasping. I couldn't process what was happening. My legs gave out, and I fell to my knees, my expensive dress pooling around me. Derek suddenly appeared, pushing through the crowd to reach me. He wrapped his arms around me as I sobbed uncontrollably into his shoulder. "How could she do this?" I kept repeating through my tears. Derek held me tighter. "I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. I should have protected you better." But I could barely hear him over the sound of my own heartbreak shattering into a million pieces. Everything I'd worked for, everyone I'd loved, gone in an instant because of a secret that was supposed to stay buried forever. Story 2. My foster family of 11 years is kicking me out with no notice. I have nowhere to go and I feel broken. When I was 6 years old, I was taken away from my biological parents, and placed with a family I'll call the Richardsons. Over time, I started thinking of them as my real mom and dad, but when I turned 13, they sat me down and firmly told me they would never officially adopt me. Their reason? They relied on the foster care payments they received for taking care of me. They always reassured me that paperwork didn't define family, and I was young enough to believe them. Well, today I discovered they were receiving approximately $3,200 monthly just for having me in their home. Now that I've just turned 18, those payments have stopped. This morning, they called me into the living room and told me I needed to leave. They explained that fostering was simply their income source, and it made no financial sense to keep me around if they weren't profiting from it. However, they said they'd be generous and give me 5 days to pack up and figure out my next steps. How kind of them. They even mentioned needing my bedroom because they already have another foster child lined up to maintain their revenue stream. They assured me they'd still like to stay in contact and hoped I'd understand this was purely a business decision, nothing personal. Update 1. It's been a couple days, and I'm still completely numb. Maybe I'm in shock, I don't really know. I only managed to sleep about 3 hours last night, so I'm probably not thinking clearly right now. Everything feels surreal and dreamlike in the worst possible way. First thing I did was reach out to my caseworker, Stephen. He's scheduled an emergency appointment with me for tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock. Hopefully he'll be able to help me figure out emergency housing options and what resources are available to me now that I'm technically an adult in the system. Second, I've been researching whether the Richardsons can legally just give me 5 days to evict me like this. I'm definitely bringing this up with Stephen to get his professional opinion. The thing is, I don't actually want to stay here any longer than absolutely necessary. Since they dropped this news on me, it's like I've become invisible in this house. They look straight through me, don't speak to me, don't offer me meals, nothing. I tried starting a conversation once just to test it, and they literally acted like I wasn't there. But I'm also not going to let them make me homeless. I'll refuse to leave until I have safe, stable housing arranged. I'm standing firm on that. Third, I thought about contacting the university that gave me a conditional acceptance. The problem is, my acceptance depends on getting certain grades on my final exams, and since I'm not technically enrolled yet, I don't know if their student services can actually help me right now, but it's worth trying. Finally, I'm going to make sure their continued fostering stipend gets cut off immediately. I'll tell Stephen tomorrow that if I'm not living here anymore, they shouldn't be collecting any transition payments or anything like that. Fortunately, I do have some savings put away. People online have told me I might qualify for housing assistance when I start university. Plus, I'll have my student loan disbursements to help. I've already started applying to jobs in the area. Update 2. I had an extensive meeting with Stephen today, and he was incredibly sympathetic. He seemed genuinely upset about how the Richardsons are handling this situation. We met initially, then he asked me to go grab lunch while he spoke directly with them, and then I returned so he could update me on everything discussed. I recorded the whole conversation on my phone because I'm so exhausted and also because my ADHD makes it hard for me to process and remember long discussions like this. I'll listen back to it tomorrow after getting some real sleep. From what I understood, Stephen is putting me on the priority list for subsidized housing. He seemed optimistic that it wouldn't take too long to get me into my own place. They'll help cover rent costs initially, and I'll also receive some funding for furniture and basic household items when I move in. During his conversation with the Richardsons, I'm not entirely sure if he told them they were legally required to keep housing me, or if he just asked them nicely, but somehow they've agreed to let me stay until the end of September. That's over 2 months away, so at least I don't have to panic about everything happening in 3 days. Stephen did mention that if I feel too uncomfortable here, I could move into a transitional youth shelter while waiting for permanent housing to become available. I told him I'd prefer to stay with the Richardsons until I'm ready to move, even if the atmosphere is awkward and tense. On a completely different note, my best friend Vanessa and I got into a massive fight earlier today. She said I'm being ungrateful to the Richardsons and that I should understand not everyone wants to raise someone else's kid. According to her, they might have been doing it for money, but they still provided me with housing and food until I turned 18, and that counts for something. Hearing that from her really hurt. We screamed at each other for almost an hour. I guess I just assumed out of everyone in my life, she would understand what I'm going through. Maybe I'm being unreasonable, though. I'm extremely tired, so maybe I'm not controlling my emotions well right now. I'm planning to talk to her tomorrow after I've gotten some sleep. I'm hoping this whole argument will just blow over because I desperately need her support right now. I don't feel like I have anyone else. Update 3. The Richardsons' youngest son, Cameron, found my original Reddit post. I should have been more careful with the identifying details, but my brain was so frantic when I wrote it that I couldn't think straight. I'm not sure exactly how he discovered it, but considering it now has almost 12,000 upvotes, and Cameron was the one who introduced me to Reddit in the first place, I guess it probably just appeared on his feed. A few hours ago, Cameron came to my bedroom. He showed me the post on his phone and asked if I'd written it. At first I tried denying it, but I'm a terrible liar and he could see right through me. He asked why I hadn't told him any of this was happening, and I said I assumed he already knew. Cameron told me he had absolutely no idea and would never have supported his parents kicking me out if he'd known. He said they told him I had requested to move out on my own. He seemed genuinely shocked and horrified by everything in the post. Against my wishes, Cameron shared the post in our family group chat. He did it because he wanted to defend me, sending a message that said, "Mom, Dad, you really need to read this and see what impact your decision is having on her." But I really wish he hadn't done that. They've both read the message now. I can see the read receipts. But neither has responded. I haven't left my bedroom since this happened. My anxiety is through the roof right now. I can feel myself approaching a full panic attack. My chest is tight, and I can't stop shaking. Update 4. This is the message I'm planning to send in the family group chat to Margaret and Paul. I came to you as a 6-year-old. A 6-year-old who had never experienced love, affection, or anything remotely positive. I was conditioned from an early age to be terrified of authority figures, to fear the unpredictable mood swings of my birth parents. I was taught to suppress all my emotions and pain, to never let anything show. When I first arrived at your house, fear and anxiety controlled every aspect of my life. I know my behavior back then was challenging and difficult to manage. I had learned there were no consequences for certain actions, and severe, frightening consequences for others. The worst part was that these rules never seemed consistent. I could do something one day and receive praise from my biological family, and the very next day face the complete opposite reaction. Love wasn't freely given. It was something you had to earn. It was conditional and superficial. You both showed me a different way. You showed me genuine love and affection, and at first it felt completely confusing and impossible to understand. I couldn't see myself as anything other than a burden. I couldn't comprehend why anyone would love me. I couldn't understand why you weren't hurting me. Do you remember me telling you, "You can hurt me if I'm bad, I won't mind"? Gradually, you taught me to trust myself and others around me. You showed me that regardless of what I did, you wouldn't abandon me or reject me or hate me. And believe me, I really tested that theory. I know I was scared. You helped me realize that being in foster care wasn't my fault, and that I wasn't responsible for what happened in my biological family. You taught me healthy ways to process my fears. You showed me love, compassion, and genuine kindness. The first day I remember truly feeling safe was when I was sitting in your arms at 9 years old watching Finding Nemo. I still think about that moment constantly. It probably felt like just another ordinary day to you, but for me it's one of the most important memories of my entire life. It's a moment that fundamentally shaped how I see myself. You stayed up with me when I was nervous about starting high school. You comforted me when my birth father told me he no longer wanted any contact with me. You were there when my first boyfriend broke up with me at 16, and I felt like my entire world was collapsing. You pushed me to work hard in school and apply to university. The most important thing you showed me was that I was worthy of being loved and respected. You never gave up on me. I am who I am today, directly, because of what you did for me. When I look at myself, I see compassion, care, and kindness, and in those qualities, I see you. You weren't my biological family, but you were my family. My only family. I just don't understand what changed. Why has there been such a drastic shift? Why have you transformed from the loving, caring parents you used to be? When I leave my room now, I no longer feel that love and kindness that pulled me out of despair as a child. It's almost as if you've completely changed how you view me, and I can't comprehend why. A few days ago, you told me I had to move out. You gave me 5 days' notice to leave my family. You sent me right back to feeling like that traumatized child at 6 years old. I'm not saying this to guilt you or beg you to let me stay. That opportunity has passed, and unfortunately, I don't think I'll ever be able to see you the same way again. I understand if you were struggling financially or if you wanted to help another child like me, but why not talk to me about it? Why spring it on me suddenly and then act like I don't matter? Why tell me it's just business? Did you think that would somehow make it hurt less? Since you told me this news, my entire life has been turned upside down, and I don't know how I'll make it through. If I had felt like this a few weeks ago, do you know who I would have gone to? I would have come to you. I would have told you my worries and fears, and you would have said exactly the right thing. Then we'd sit together and watch some terrible reality TV show. Now I have no one again. I feel like I'm being told for the second time in my life that I don't deserve a family. This time, I have no one to help me through it. That person was always you, Mom and Dad. It was always you I could rely on. Why are you giving up on me now? Update 5. Stephen is letting me store belongings I can't take with me in his garage, which is incredibly kind of him. He's found me a spot at a local transitional housing facility. I'll have my own private room apparently, which was a major factor in deciding whether I wanted to move there or not. The facility works directly with social services and houses a lot of young adults aging out of foster care while they wait for permanent housing. I haven't sent the message yet, but I know Cameron has seen it. Yesterday I felt overwhelming, crushing emotions about everything. Today I feel absolutely nothing. I don't know which is worse. I'll send the message once I've moved out. I have a room ready, so I'll be gone in a few hours. I still haven't spoken directly to Margaret and Paul, but I just can't face them anymore. I'm sick of being anxious and stressed and walking on eggshells about all of this. Update 6. I just left the Richardson house for the last time. My room is ready at the facility. I feel so strange and sad and isolated right now. I've ordered myself Chinese food for dinner tonight, and Stephen even paid for it, which was really thoughtful. I just want to crawl into bed and cry until I can't cry anymore. My head is spinning thinking about everything I still need to do and figure out. I also found out the exact amount the Richardsons were paid bi-weekly for caring for me. They received $2,600 every 2 weeks. That's $6,600 per year they were paid just to raise me. I keep thinking about that number over and over. Was that all I was worth to them? Just a paycheck? Update 7. I'm settled in the facility now. It's definitely not luxury living, to say the least, but at least I'm here and safe. I sent the text message to the family group chat and then immediately left the chat. I also posted it publicly on Facebook before I could second-guess myself. Final update. This is going to be my last update on all of this. Margaret called me this morning, crying hysterically, saying she had no idea I felt this way. How could she possibly not know? She kept saying she was sorry and begged me to come back home. God, how do I keep ruining everything? She was telling me all these things about how she regrets the past few weeks so much and wishes she could take everything back. I told her this wasn't fair. She can't throw me out and then call me sobbing. I said what she's doing is manipulative. She just kept repeating, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. She said she loves me and wants me to come home. Jesus, this has to be a lie, right? She must have known what she was doing to me. Am I the bad person here? I feel so confused and lost. I don't know what to do or think anymore. I just hung up on her, and then she started sending me dozens of text messages, so I blocked her number. But now I feel like I'm the villain in this situation. I'm so exhausted by all of this. I'm tired of the emotional manipulation and the constant back and forth. I just want peace. Story 3. I rescued a stray cat and she saved my life, but then she vanished and I found her dying. I'm an emergency room nurse, and one freezing November night during my shift, a paramedic rushed in carrying a small cardboard box. Found this behind the hospital, he said, opening it to reveal a tiny cat barely clinging to life. I examined her immediately. She was covered in matted fur, had severe dehydration, multiple infected cuts, and her body temperature was dangerously low. But her heart was still beating. I knew I had to act fast. After my shift ended, I stayed late and worked on her for hours, cleaning her wounds, administering fluids, and wrapping her in heated blankets. The procedure was incredibly delicate, but somehow she pulled through. Over the next several days, I visited her constantly during my breaks. She was so weak at first, but gradually, she started responding to my voice. The moment she first purred when I stroked her head, I knew I couldn't let her go to a shelter. I decided right then to take her home. I named her Luna. The day I brought Luna home, I had prepared everything perfectly. I set up a comfortable space in my bedroom with a soft purple bed, scratching posts, and a collection of toy mice. But Luna had other plans. She refused to stay in her designated area. Whenever I tried to settle her there, she'd meow pitifully until I picked her up. If I was cooking, she'd sit on the counter watching me. If I was reading, she'd curl up on my lap. And at night, forget the fancy bed. She insisted on sleeping on my pillow, her face inches from mine. The first time I had to leave her alone for a work shift, I was incredibly anxious. I set up cameras to check on her throughout the day. But when I came home, there she was, sitting by the front door, like she'd been waiting there for hours. Her tail swished back and forth excitedly when she saw me. From that moment on, it became our ritual. No matter how exhausting my 12-hour shifts were, seeing Luna waiting for me made everything better. As Luna regained her strength, her personality blossomed. She became playful and mischievous, knocking things off counters, hiding my keys, and somehow always finding a way into my closet to nap on my clothes. I knew she needed more stimulation, so I started taking her outside on a harness. She loved it. We'd explore the neighborhood together, and she'd chase butterflies and climb trees while I kept a careful watch. One afternoon at the local park, Luna was particularly energetic. She was chasing a leaf that was blowing in the wind when she darted between the legs of a jogger. The woman stumbled slightly but caught herself. Before I could apologize, she turned around furiously and tried to kick Luna, not once, but twice. The second kick connected, and Luna let out a terrible screech. I ran over immediately, pulling Luna into my arms and demanding to know what was wrong with this woman. She started screaming that people like me shouldn't be allowed to have pets, that I was irresponsible, and that Luna should be put in a shelter. We got into a heated argument, and at one point, she raised her hand toward me. That's when Luna, still in my arms, hissed viciously and swiped at her with claws extended. The woman backed off quickly and stormed away. That moment solidified everything. Luna wasn't just my pet, she was my protector. Months passed peacefully, until one evening after an overnight shift. I came home exhausted, expecting Luna's usual greeting at the door. But she wasn't there. I called her name repeatedly, searching every room, but Luna was nowhere to be found. Panic set in. I checked every window, every door, trying to figure out how she could have escaped. Then I noticed it, a small tear in the window screen in my bedroom, just large enough for a determined cat to squeeze through. My heart sank. I ran outside, calling for Luna desperately. I knocked on every neighbor's door, asking if anyone had seen her. As I passed by the apartment next to mine, I saw Mr. Chen, an older gentleman who spent most of his time on his balcony reading. If anyone had seen something, it would be him. I rushed over and asked if he'd seen Luna. He thought for a moment, then mentioned seeing a cat near the parking lot about an hour ago. I sprinted to the parking lot, but there was nothing. No sign of Luna anywhere. I searched the bushes, checked under cars, called her name until my voice was hoarse. Nothing. When I went back to Mr. Chen for more details, he admitted he hadn't been wearing his reading glasses. He couldn't say for certain it had been Luna. I asked every other neighbor, but no one had seen her. The weight of losing her was crushing. I didn't sleep that night. I kept imagining Luna out there, scared and alone. The next morning, I printed hundreds of flyers with her photo and posted them everywhere within a 5-mile radius. I called every animal shelter, every vet clinic. Days turned into a week with no word. The apartment felt unbearably empty without Luna. I missed her constant presence, the way she'd follow me from room to room, the way she'd groom herself on the bathroom counter while I got ready for work, the way she'd attack the cursor on my laptop screen. I couldn't focus at work. Every moment, I was thinking about her. Then, 8 days after she disappeared, I received a call from an animal control facility 40 miles away. Someone had found Luna wandering near a highway and brought her in. I couldn't believe it. I called in sick to work and drove there immediately. When I arrived and they brought her out, my heart broke. Luna looked terrible, thin, dirty, covered in new scratches. But when she saw me, she let out the loudest meow and practically leaped into my arms. I held her tightly, crying, as she purred against my chest. The drive home was quiet. Luna slept the entire way, completely exhausted. When we got back to the apartment, I gave her a gentle bath, fed her small amounts of food, and let her rest. She barely left my side for days after that. I immediately replaced all the window screens and added extra security measures. I became even more vigilant about keeping her safe. I couldn't go through that fear again. But just when I thought life was returning to normal, Luna started acting strangely. She wasn't eating, seemed lethargic, and kept hiding in dark corners. I immediately took her to my veterinarian friend's clinic for a full examination. The X-rays revealed my worst nightmare. Luna had a severe intestinal blockage, likely from something she'd eaten while she was missing. It required emergency surgery, and it needed to happen immediately. My friend offered to perform it, but I insisted on being there, on helping. The surgery was incredibly complex. We worked for over 5 hours, carefully removing the obstruction. Every moment was terrifying. This was Luna, my Luna, lying there so vulnerable. Around 2 a.m., exhaustion was setting in hard. I stepped out, drank 2 cups of coffee, and went back in. We couldn't give up. Finally, we successfully removed the blockage and closed her up. Then came the agonizing wait. I sat beside her recovery cage, monitoring every breath, every heartbeat. The clinic was silent except for the beeping of monitors. I was too afraid to sleep, too afraid to look away. As dawn broke, Luna's eyes slowly opened. She looked at me and let out a weak meow. Tears streamed down my face as I gently stroked her head. She had made it through. Over the following days, Luna slowly recovered. Her appetite returned, her energy came back, and soon she was back to her old self, following me around and demanding attention. The next few years were beautiful. Luna and I fell into a comfortable rhythm. We had our routines, our special moments. But as time passed, I noticed Luna was slowing down. She was aging. Her movements became less agile, she slept more, and her once shiny black coat started showing patches of gray. One cold December evening, we were sitting together on the couch. Luna was curled up on my lap, purring softly as I stroked her fur. I told her how much she meant to me, how she'd changed my life, how grateful I was for every moment we'd shared. That night, Luna passed away peacefully in her sleep, still curled up on my lap. When I woke up and realized she was gone, the grief was overwhelming. But alongside the pain, there was gratitude. Luna had given me so much love, so much companionship, so much purpose. I buried Luna in my parents' garden under a willow tree, in a spot where the morning sun would always reach. As I stood there in the cold winter morning, I realized that Luna had saved me just as much as I'd saved her. She taught me about resilience, about unconditional love, and about cherishing every precious moment we have. Story 4. Today marks the anniversary of the night I almost died, and the silence from everyone I loved hurt more than the accident itself. I was in the backseat of an Uber heading home from a late shift at the restaurant when I heard the most horrific screeching sound of metal tearing apart, followed by my own screaming. The pain in my right leg and ribs was excruciating, and I couldn't understand what was happening. Our car was spinning, and I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare. When everything finally stopped moving, I forced my eyes open despite the stabbing pain and saw that a drunk driver had T-boned us at full speed, hitting directly where I was sitting. The entire right side of the car was crushed inward. If I hadn't shifted to grab my water bottle from the left side just seconds before impact, the collision would have killed me instantly, instead of just slamming into my leg and torso. Once I realized I was still alive, I managed to pull out my phone with shaking hands and call my fiancé. I could barely breathe, but I needed to hear his voice. I needed to tell him I loved him in case these were my final moments. When he answered, I could barely get the words out. He made me promise to keep fighting, to stay awake, to come home to him. The Uber driver had already called emergency services, and within minutes I heard sirens. My vision was getting blurry, and my body started shaking uncontrollably. I was going into shock. The violent tremors made it look like I was having convulsions, and I remember the paramedics rushing toward the mangled car. Through the haze, I saw my fiancé's face appear behind the emergency workers. He must have broken every speed limit to get there so fast. His expression was calm and steady, even though I could see the terror in his eyes. He didn't want my last memory to be of him falling apart. I tried to smile at him, tried to focus on his face instead of the pain, instead of the fear that I was dying right there on that street. I thought about my sister, who I'd been so close to growing up. We'd drifted apart over the years because of her jealousy issues, but she was still my sister. I thought about my parents and wondered if they'd even care that I was gone. The paramedics were trying to figure out how to extract me from the wreckage without causing more damage. My neck and back were in agony, but I knew if I didn't help them, we'd waste precious time. Despite their protests, I carefully shifted my weight and helped guide myself onto the stretcher. My fiancé stood there watching, his jaw clenched tight. I looked directly at him and whispered that I'd be okay. Those might have been my last words to him. In the ambulance, a police officer was taking photos of my injuries for the report. The drunk driver had fled the scene on foot, leaving his destroyed vehicle behind. In our city where the justice system barely functions anymore, I knew they'd probably never find him. Once we started moving, my fiancé asked who I wanted him to call. I told him to call my parents. My mom didn't pick up, so he tried my dad. My father has always been emotionally distant, the kind of man who sees feelings as weakness. When he finally answered, my fiancé handed me the phone. I told my dad what happened, that I'd been in a serious accident, that I might not make it through the night. His response? "It's midnight on a work night. Your mother and I have an early meeting tomorrow. Can this wait?" I told him no, it couldn't wait, that there might not be a tomorrow, and that I just needed to talk to Mom. He sighed heavily and grudgingly handed her the phone. My mom got on the line, sounding annoyed about being woken up. I explained everything while my dad yelled at her in the background to hurry up. I sent her photos of the crash scene and my injuries. Her reaction was like I'd told her I'd gotten a paper cut at work. "Okay, well, get some rest. I need to get back to sleep," she said, before hanging up. When we arrived at the hospital, the emergency room was completely overwhelmed. They wheeled me in without even checking my vitals first. I lay there in that bed for nearly 4 hours, still covered in small cuts and debris, my body feeling like it had been shattered. No one cleaned my wounds. No one came to check on me after the initial scans. When someone finally appeared with basic pain medication in the final hour, I actually laughed bitterly at the absurdity. My fiancé never left my side. He sat there calmly talking to me, holding my hand, being the only person in the world who seemed to care whether I lived or died. In that moment, I realized this was the story of my entire life, him being there while everyone else was absent. I had never felt more abandoned. After the X-rays and MRI came back, I called my childhood best friend who lived 10 minutes from the hospital. We'd known each other since elementary school. I told her what happened, and she gasped, asking if she should come. How was I supposed to answer that? I said yes, if she wanted to. She said she'd be right there. An hour passed, then another. My fiancé finally texted her to check in. She responded that she'd just gotten distracted watching a show and lost track of time. That hurt worse than any physical injury. Somehow, miraculously, the scans showed no broken bones or internal bleeding, just severe bruising, soft tissue damage, and a partially collapsed lung that would heal on its own. I should have been relieved, but I wasn't. I felt nothing but emptiness. Before this accident, I'd spent years battling severe depression and anxiety from childhood trauma. I'd attempted to end my own life twice before. I lived with chronic pain from fibromyalgia and had been diagnosed with complex PTSD. And now this, another traumatic experience to add to the collection, another nightmare to relive forever while everyone else would forget about it in days. As I was being discharged, I texted my best friend not to bother coming anymore. The next 3 weeks were spent in my bedroom with the curtains drawn, sleeping 18 hours a day, and crying during the few hours I was awake. I tried to raise awareness about drunk driving in our area. I started an online petition to increase DUI checkpoints and enforcement. I was mocked ruthlessly in the comments. Strangers told me I was overreacting, that accidents happen, that I should move on. I did one interview with a local news station after my Facebook post about the incident went semi-viral. A man commented on the story that he was tired of hearing women claim they have trauma from every little thing, that I was self-diagnosing for attention, and that the real problem was that I was too sensitive and needed to toughen up because nobody cares about your problems. People questioned whether it had really been that bad. My brother's wife asked me if I was sure I'd actually been seriously injured since I looked fine now. She wondered aloud why it was affecting me so much when I didn't even break anything. Strangers who recognized me from the news would stop me and say it didn't look like I'd been in a life-threatening accident. Hundreds of people told me how lucky I was, how grateful I should be that I survived, how blessed I was that I didn't have permanent disabilities or die. Do you know how infuriating it is to be told you're lucky after something like this? To have people minimize your trauma because the outcome could have been worse? And because they mean well, all I can do is smile and thank them while choking on my anger. My fiancé, who I'd been with since we were teenagers, stayed strong for me for months. He never complained, never made it about himself, even though he was traumatized too. But around 5 months after the accident, he finally broke down completely. He sobbed for days. He confessed that he'd driven like a maniac that night because he wanted to see me alive one more time. He'd been preparing to say goodbye. In the weeks immediately following the accident, I barely ate. Maybe one small meal every few days. I felt like if I left the safety of my bed, something terrible would happen again. To this day, every time I leave my apartment, I expect to be suddenly and violently hurt. I can't ride in cars without panic attacks. Every loud noise makes me jump. Every time I see an intersection, I relive those seconds of impact. My childhood best friend never gave me a real explanation for why she didn't show up that night. I found out months later that she'd been dealing with a gambling addiction that had spiraled out of control. When she stayed at my place a year later and stole jewelry and electronics from us to pawn for cash, I finally cut her off completely. If she's reading this somehow, you were the worst friend imaginable when I needed you most, and I hope you figure out your life. My parents never called to check on me in the weeks following the accident. Not once. Then, about 2 months later, my mother called absolutely hysterical because I wouldn't drop everything and fly across the country with one day's notice to be there when her childhood horse was being put down. She couldn't handle being there alone and demanded I come support her. I completely lost it. I screamed at her that she hadn't bothered to visit me when I was possibly dying in a hospital bed, and now she had the audacity to be angry with me for not being able to afford a last-minute flight costing nearly $1,000 to support her through something that, while sad, wasn't even comparable. We didn't speak for almost 6 months after that fight. Later, she was diagnosed with early-onset dementia, which apparently explained some of her behavior. She eventually apologized, and I let her back into my life, though our relationship has never been the same. My brother has always struggled with emotional intelligence. A few days after the accident, I told him I was dreading the psychological aftermath, that I knew the trauma would hit me hard. He looked genuinely confused and said, "I don't understand why you'd be upset about it. If it were me, it wouldn't affect me at all." There was nothing I could say to that. You can't explain psychological trauma to someone fundamentally incapable of understanding it. The following year was the darkest of my life. My eating disorder, which I'd been managing for years, completely spiraled out of control. I dropped to a dangerous weight. Every single day, multiple times a day, I relived those moments of impact. Dropping a dish in the kitchen would send me into a panic attack. Seeing headlights through my window at night would make me shake. Driving under overpasses was impossible for months. There was never any justice. The drunk driver was never caught. Life just continued, indifferent to my suffering. I've lived every single day trapped in the hell inside my mind, with my fiancé as my only real support system. And therapy? Don't even get me started on that disaster. That's an entirely different story I don't have the energy to tell. I look completely normal now. The scars on my leg are barely visible. I'm young, I'm relatively healthy, I'm engaged to a wonderful man. To everyone else, I'm the picture of someone who survived and moved on. Lucky. Blessed. Fine. Yesterday, I mentioned to my mom on a video call that I was feeling down because it was the anniversary of the accident. She looked at me with genuine confusion and said, "It's not really an anniversary though, is it? Anniversaries are for celebrating things worth remembering." I haven't spoken to her since. Story 5. My controlling father-in-law tried destroying my entire business because I refused to give my sister-in-law a job she wasn't qualified for, so I cut contact with them and they started a war against me and my husband. I'm a software engineer and co-founder of a cybersecurity startup. A few months ago, my father-in-law Dennis demanded that I hire his daughter Sarah as our head of marketing, despite her having zero experience in tech or B2B marketing. When I politely declined, explaining that we needed someone with specific industry expertise, he lost it. Dennis had always resented me. When the pandemic hit and everyone was working remotely, Sarah had mocked tech workers relentlessly, calling us keyboard warriors who contributed nothing to society. She told family members at gatherings that people in my field were overpaid and lazy. Once, she even publicly questioned whether I actually understood coding or if I'd hired someone else to do my work. Dennis always laughed these comments off as Sarah just being honest or telling it like it is. I reminded Dennis of all this when he demanded I give Sarah the position. I told him I wasn't about to risk my company's reputation and investor relationships by hiring someone who'd openly disrespected my entire profession. He had the nerve to say that was ancient history and that I was being petty. After I hung up, my husband Daniel begged me to reconsider. He pleaded with me to be the bigger person and help his sister out. But I refused. I wasn't going to hand a critical role to someone who'd spent years belittling what I do. Daniel has always had trouble saying no to Sarah. She's 5 years younger and has always manipulated him into giving her what she wants. 3 years ago, when Daniel and I were planning to buy our first house together, we'd found the perfect place within our budget. But Sarah had other ideas. She wanted us to buy a fixer-upper property that her contractor boyfriend could renovate. The property was a disaster and would have required at least $150,000 in additional work. She kept pressuring Daniel, saying her boyfriend needed the work and that we'd be helping family. When Daniel hesitated, she reminded him of how she'd lent him money when he was in grad school, how she'd helped him move apartments multiple times, and how their dad would be so proud to see us supporting her boyfriend's business. The final manipulation was when she said, "With your partner being so successful in tech, what's an extra $100,000? You guys can afford it." Daniel eventually caved. We bought that nightmare house. The renovation took 2 years, went $80,000 over budget, and the boyfriend's work was shoddy. We had to hire other contractors to fix his mistakes, but Sarah got what she wanted, as always. Now, years later, I was getting the same guilt trip about doing this for family. I reminded Daniel of how Sarah had undermined my career repeatedly, but he acted like it was nothing, like I should just forget years of disrespect. 4 years ago, I was being considered for a major partnership with a venture capital firm. It was a massive opportunity that would have meant significant funding and credibility for my startup. The family had gathered at Dennis's lake house for the 4th of July weekend. I was excited to share the news, hoping even Sarah might acknowledge it as an achievement. As I explained the opportunity and how close we were to closing the deal, I noticed Sarah smirking. She asked if I was worried about the competition. I said of course, but the firm seemed genuinely interested in our technology. Daniel told her to be more positive. Sarah responded, "Oh, I'm sure you'll get it, unless they dig too deep into your background." I didn't understand what she meant at the time, but something about her tone made my stomach turn. I tried to brush it off as her usual needling. 3 weeks later, just as we were preparing for the final pitch presentation, I received an anonymous tip sent to my business email. It contained fabricated forum posts and fake LinkedIn messages claiming I'd stolen code from a previous employer and had been involved in a data breach scandal at my last company. The accusations were completely false, but they were detailed enough to seem credible. I was devastated. Word started spreading in our investor circles. Potential partners began ghosting our calls. The VC firm requested a pause on negotiations pending further investigation. My co-founders looked at me with suspicion. Everything I'd built was crumbling. I hired a digital forensics expert to trace the source. What they discovered made my blood boil. All the fake posts and emails originated from IP addresses linked to Sarah's apartment building and a VPN service registered under her boyfriend's credit card. I drove straight to Sarah's apartment and confronted her. I told her I knew she'd tried to sabotage my business and demanded to know why. She sneered at me and said I'd always acted superior with my fancy tech company and that she was leveling the playing field. She said I didn't deserve success more than she did. When Daniel found out, he was horrified. He confronted Sarah and stopped speaking to her for nearly a year. But eventually, she wormed her way back in with apologies and tears. She always did. Even though I was able to prove my innocence, the damage was done. The VC firm moved on to other opportunities. We lost crucial momentum and had to bootstrap for another 2 years before finding different investors. My startup survived, but we'd lost millions in potential funding. After I refused to hire Sarah, Dennis and Sarah went scorched earth. They started calling me constantly, at all hours. They'd show up at my office building, causing scenes in the lobby. Security had to escort them out multiple times. One afternoon, I was in the middle of a crucial client demo when I saw Sarah in our office's reception area. My heart sank. She'd somehow talked her way past the front desk by claiming to be family visiting for lunch. As I walked toward reception, I heard her talking loudly to 2 of our potential clients who were waiting for their meeting. She was telling them that I'd refused to hire her because I knew she'd expose all the shortcuts and questionable practices at the company. She said I was threatened by competent women and that I was probably stealing code from open-source projects without proper licensing. The clients looked uncomfortable and confused. I tried to professionally excuse myself and Sarah, but she got louder. She started telling everyone in the reception area that I was a fraud, that I'd built my entire career on other people's work, and that my own family wouldn't even trust me. Our office manager, several employees, and the clients all witnessed this scene. I felt like I was back at square one, watching my professional reputation crumble again. I firmly told Sarah she needed to leave immediately, or I'd call the police. She finally left, but not before shouting that the truth always comes out. The next morning, I checked our company's Glassdoor and Google Business. Reviews out of routine. My stomach dropped. There were dozens of new negative reviews, all posted overnight. They claimed our company had toxic management, that we stole intellectual property, that we discriminated in hiring, and that the CEO, me, was ethically compromised and refuses to help even family members in need. One review read, "The CEO refused to give their own sister-in-law a job because they knew she'd uncover all their shady practices. What does that tell you about this company?" Another said, "Beware working here. Leadership prioritizes personal vendettas over qualified candidates. Nepotism runs rampant, except when it comes to people who might actually hold them accountable." The reviews were obviously fake, but they were damaging. I knew Sarah and Dennis were behind them. Later that week, as I was leaving the office, Dennis was waiting by my car. I'd had enough. I told him this harassment had to stop immediately. They'd crossed every possible line. Dennis tried to twist it around, saying none of this would have happened if I'd just given Sarah the opportunity she deserved. He said I'd brought all of this on myself by being arrogant and selfish. I realized arguing was pointless. I got in my car and drove away. That night, Sarah started posting on social media about me and the company. She made lengthy posts about how I was an unethical business owner who exploited employees, cut corners on security protocols, and had gotten where I was through connections rather than skill. She implied I'd sabotaged her career out of jealousy and spite. Over the following weeks, potential clients started asking uncomfortable questions. Some existing clients requested additional security audits. My co-founders were stressed. The smear campaign was affecting not just me, but everyone who'd worked hard to build the company. All of this was happening right after I'd finally rebuilt my reputation from Sarah's previous sabotage attempt. One evening, after an exhausting day of damage control, I sat Daniel down in our home office. I told him I couldn't handle the harassment anymore. For my mental health and our company's survival, I needed to completely remove his father and sister from my life. His face went pale. He asked me to explain what I meant. I told him I couldn't attend family events and pretend everything was fine while they were publicly destroying my reputation and jeopardizing my business for the second time. They'd made it clear they'd do anything to hurt me. Daniel was torn. Sarah and Dennis still had significant influence over him. He said he couldn't choose between me and his family, that it wasn't fair I was making him decide. I told him I'd give him a few days to think about what he wanted. He said he didn't need time. He told me he loved me and understood how much damage they'd caused. He ultimately chose our marriage and our life together. However, cutting them off didn't stop anything. Dennis and Sarah turned their fury toward Daniel. They accused him of being brainwashed and controlled. They called him constantly, sent vicious text messages, and even showed up at his workplace causing disruptions. They told extended family members that I'd stolen Daniel from them and poisoned him against his own blood. Then, out of nowhere, I received an anonymous email. It contained screenshots of text conversations between Sarah and Dennis, along with a cousin, discussing their detailed plan to systematically destroy my business reputation if I didn't give Sarah the job she wanted. The messages talked about coordinating fake reviews, spreading rumors to our investors, and even considering filing false complaints with industry regulatory bodies. I was shocked, but not surprised. This was proof of coordinated malicious intent. I showed Daniel immediately. Even he couldn't deny the evidence anymore. His family had actively conspired to ruin me professionally. Daniel decided to confront them directly. He arranged a meeting with Dennis and Sarah, bringing printed copies of all the screenshots. They initially thought he was meeting them to announce I'd agreed to hire Sarah. Their expressions changed when I walked in behind Daniel and we laid the evidence on the table. The confrontation was explosive. Sarah denied everything at first, then claimed the messages were taken out of context. When that didn't work, she became defensive and angry. Daniel asked her why she'd go so far when I'd done nothing to deserve this level of vindictiveness. Sarah finally admitted it. She said I'd never been good enough for Daniel, that I was some arrogant tech nerd who thought they were better than everyone. She revealed that she'd resented me from the beginning because Daniel had always prioritized me over family obligations. She'd been trying to prove to Daniel that I was weak and untrustworthy, expecting him to eventually see her perspective and leave me. Dennis had enabled every bit of it, believing his daughter's version of events without question. After seeing how their actions were now directly affecting Daniel's job and well-being, Daniel realized how toxic they truly were. He decided to cut contact as well, blocking their numbers and all social media. The aftermath was emotionally brutal. Daniel and I tried to move forward, but there was an emptiness where his family used to be. Daniel struggled with guilt and grief over losing those relationships. I was dealing with ongoing stress from repairing my professional reputation yet again and processing the trauma of being systematically targeted. We both started therapy. I worked with a counselor who specialized in workplace harassment and reputation management. Daniel joined a support group for people who'd gone no contact with toxic family members. Gradually, my colleagues and clients began to see through the smear campaign. They offered support and defended me when Sarah's false narratives came up. Over time, I rebuilt professional trust. The fake reviews were eventually removed after I provided evidence of coordination to the platforms. My reputation as an innovative and ethical tech leader was slowly restored. Daniel found strength he didn't know he had. He invested in new friendships and professional connections, building a chosen family that supported him unconditionally. Several months later, we received an unexpected letter from Dennis. He apologized for enabling Sarah's behavior, admitted he'd been wrong to dismiss my concerns, and asked if there was any possibility of repairing the relationship. He said he'd had a health scare that made him reflect on his priorities and regrets. I showed the letter to Daniel. He read it carefully, tears forming in his eyes. He said he might be willing to cautiously reconnect with his father, but needed time. He wasn't ready to have any contact with Sarah. I agreed. We decided to take things incredibly slowly to protect the peace we'd finally found. We met Dennis at a neutral location, a quiet restaurant downtown. We established firm boundaries from the start. No discussion of Sarah, no pressure about family obligations, and zero tolerance for any behavior that resembled the past harassment. I was skeptical the meeting would accomplish anything, but wanted to support Daniel. Sarah, unsurprisingly, showed no remorse. From what we heard through extended family, she continued playing the victim, telling anyone who'd listen that I'd destroyed her relationship with her brother out of jealousy and spite. Years have passed now. Daniel and I have built a beautiful life together. Our company is thriving. We've learned to protect our peace fiercely and surround ourselves with people who genuinely support us. We have a chosen family of friends and colleagues who celebrate our successes instead of undermining them. One evening, as we sat on our back deck watching the sunset, Daniel looked at me and smiled. He said that despite everything we'd been through, he wouldn't change it. The challenges had shown him what truly mattered and made us stronger as a couple. I squeezed his hand, knowing he was right. We'd faced the worst and survived. We'd made the right choices, and we were exactly where we needed to be. Story 6. My cheating girlfriend was having an affair with my older brother, and it turns out he's the father of my nephew who I thought was my cousin's kid. I discovered my girlfriend was having a 5-year-long affair with my older brother, Vincent. But the betrayal went even deeper than I could have imagined. 5 years ago, my cousin Melissa supposedly got pregnant from a brief relationship that didn't work out. My girlfriend Rachel insisted we should help Melissa raise the baby since she was struggling financially. The baby brought enormous financial pressure, and Melissa begged me to take on extra shifts to help support them. I worked myself to exhaustion, taking a second job bartending on weekends while maintaining my full-time position as a physical therapist. Over the years, I asked repeatedly why Melissa wouldn't pursue the father for child support. Each time she'd make vague excuses about not knowing how to find him or not wanting to cause drama. The stress of working 80-hour weeks destroyed my health. I'd come home exhausted and break down crying to Rachel about how overwhelmed I felt. That manipulative witch would hold me, stroke my hair, and tell me everything would be okay, all while knowing she and Vincent were the reason I was working myself into the ground. All while knowing Vincent was the father of little Oliver, the child I thought was my cousin's son. When I finally discovered the truth, I felt like the world had collapsed beneath me. I sat frozen on our apartment couch, unable to process what I was seeing on Rachel's laptop that she'd left open. Text messages between her and Vincent going back years, photos, plans to meet up, and worst of all, a message thread discussing how they needed to be more careful because I was getting suspicious. Eventually, I found enough strength to confront her. When Rachel walked through the door after her yoga class, I called her over. She asked what was wrong, why I looked so pale. I told her I knew. She looked at the laptop screen where her messages with Vincent were displayed, and the color drained from her face instantly. She didn't even try to deny it. She admitted they'd been sleeping together not just around Oliver's conception, but constantly. Every time I worked my weekend bartending shifts, every time I stayed late at the clinic, they were together. She even confessed that she'd encouraged me to take that week-long continuing education course in California last year because she knew I needed the professional development. During that entire week, while I was texting her every night saying how much I missed her, she was in our bed with my brother. The worst part? She admitted the last time they were intimate was a few months ago when Vincent's wife almost caught them, and they decided they needed to be more careful. They'd been planning to eventually tell everyone, but only after they figured out how to minimize the damage. His words felt like acid in my veins. Every memory was now poisoned. Every tender moment was a lie. I told her we were done. She started crying, begging me not to leave, saying we could work through this. I told her there was no working through sleeping with my brother for 5 years and letting me raise his child thinking it was my cousin's. I quickly packed bags for myself and Oliver. I called my best friend Derek and asked if we could crash at his place. He immediately said yes. Before I left, I told Rachel to inform Vincent and Melissa that I wanted nothing to do with any of them. They were all dead to me. It destroyed me to lose my brother, my girlfriend, and my cousin all in one day. They were my family, my core support system, but I couldn't stay after such a profound betrayal. As I drove to Derek's apartment, every time I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw Oliver's innocent face. He looked so much like Vincent. How had I never noticed before? The same nose, the same smile. The resemblance was obvious now. Looking at that sweet, innocent 5-year-old face brought me unbearable pain because all I could see was my brother's betrayal. After a few days at Derek's place, Vincent showed up. I could hear them arguing on the front lawn as I was coming back from picking up Oliver from his playdate. Vincent saw my car and ran toward it, blocking my path. He was begging for another chance, apologizing repeatedly for the affair, never acknowledging the full scope of what they'd done. I told him nothing he said would change my mind. He claimed he hadn't been with Rachel in months, that it had just fizzled out naturally. I said I didn't care. He promised he'd do anything. Couples therapy, moving away, whatever it took for us to be brothers again. I told him there was no fixing this. Then he asked if he could at least see Oliver regularly, suggesting weekend visits with formal custody arrangements. He swore he didn't want to be with Rachel anymore. I refused. I was furious. He'd never considered my feelings throughout any of this, so why should I accommodate him now? Vincent got angry, told me this wasn't over, got in his car, and peeled out of Derek's driveway. Later that evening, I finally explained everything to Derek. I'd been too embarrassed to tell him the full story before. I made sure Oliver was watching cartoons in the other room so he wouldn't hear. When I told Derek that my brother had been sleeping with my girlfriend for 5 years and that Vincent was actually Oliver's father, his jaw literally dropped. He stared at me in complete shock. He told me how sorry he was, that we could stay as long as needed, and that he completely understood why I wouldn't give Vincent custody. That night, having someone validate my feelings meant everything. I decided my family and friends deserved to know the truth, especially before Vincent and Rachel could spin their own version. I posted in our extended family group chat explaining everything and included screenshots of the messages I'd photographed from Rachel's laptop. The response was explosive. My Aunt Carol immediately accused me of lying and doctoring screenshots, but my uncle and his family sided with me, saying this explained why I'd suddenly cut everyone off. My parents, who'd always favored Vincent, demanded I delete the screenshots from the group and stop spreading malicious lies about their son. I responded that if Vincent wasn't the father, they should ask Melissa who the real father was. They never replied to that. My younger sister felt terrible about everything and offered me a room in her apartment across the country. I accepted because I couldn't burden Derek indefinitely with my family chaos. I also decided I needed a fresh start, new job, new city, far away from all of them. My sister lived in Oregon, which seemed perfect for me and Oliver. While I was in the process of moving, I made a detailed post on social media about the affair. This caused massive drama in mine and Rachel's shared social circle. Some friends supported me, but others doubted the story. Mostly her sorority sisters and some of the guys from Vincent's construction crew questioned whether I was telling the truth. The comments section exploded with people defending me and attacking Vincent and Rachel. They both deactivated their accounts within hours. Then Vincent's wife started contacting me. She said she hated seeing Vincent lose someone like me. She told me he was deeply depressed and that I knew he was overall a good person who'd made a mistake. She tried to convince me to reconcile with him for the sake of family unity. I told her I didn't need to hear this. She insisted that Vincent had been faithful to his wife for months now, and that showed he'd changed. I said no again and asked her not to contact me about Vincent because I was determined to move forward. Over the next several weeks, Rachel, Vincent, and Melissa constantly tried to reach me. I blocked their numbers, but they'd call from different phones or send other family members to contact me as intermediaries. Vincent would get our mutual friends to message me on social media, always asking the same thing. Would you just hear Vincent out? My answer was always no. I didn't want to block these friends entirely because they weren't the ones who'd betrayed me, but I had to protect myself. One day, Melissa discovered I'd moved from Derek's to my sister's place. She showed up unannounced and rang the doorbell repeatedly. I saw who it was through the peephole and told my sister not to answer, but Melissa wouldn't stop. She rang that doorbell 30 times until I finally opened the door and threatened to call the police. She said she wanted to talk. I said there was nothing to discuss and tried to close the door. She blocked it with her hand and launched into apologies, saying she and Vincent hadn't been together since Oliver was born, that the affair had ended years ago. I told her I didn't care and wanted all 3 of them out of my life permanently. That wasn't entirely true. Part of me desperately missed my brother. We'd been close growing up. Vincent had taught me how to throw a football, helped me get my first apartment, stood up for me when I got bullied in middle school. But sleeping with my girlfriend and fathering a child while letting me believe he was Melissa's was unforgivable. I asked Melissa to respect my boundaries and close the door. That night, she sent a long text message explaining her role in everything. She admitted that she'd known about Vincent and Rachel's affair from the beginning. She said she'd agreed to claim Oliver as hers because Vincent had been terrified of his wife finding out, and Rachel had been scared I'd leave her. She said watching me work, myself to exhaustion to support her child, had eaten away at her conscience for years. She claimed she'd tried to tell me multiple times, but Vincent had threatened to cut her off financially if she revealed the truth. Her message included repeated apologies and explanations, but nothing that justified the years of deception. This confession somehow made everything worse. The betrayal was even more calculated than I'd realized. In the midst of this chaos, Vincent filed for legal custody of Oliver. The court proceedings were exhausting and emotionally devastating. I believed he was only pursuing custody out of spite, as a way to force continued contact with me. I could see through his manipulations. Despite my objections, the judge granted Vincent partial custody since he was biologically Oliver's father and could prove he'd been financially supporting the child. It was another devastating blow. Vincent was awarded custody for the remainder of summer. Since it was late June, the judge ruled Oliver would be with Vincent until mid-August, then return to me for the school year. As we were leaving the courthouse, Oliver ran to me and wrapped his arms around my waist. He said he didn't want to live with Vincent, that he wanted to stay with me. I fought back tears and told him it would only be for a little while, that I'd call him every single day. Vincent suddenly grabbed Oliver's arm and pulled him away, accusing me of trying to turn his child against him. Oliver started crying. I hugged him tightly and told him I loved him. Later that afternoon, I watched Vincent's car drive away with Oliver inside. I wiped tears from my eyes so I could see them leave more clearly. I knew I had to make this transition as smooth as possible for Oliver, and I needed to use this time to work on myself so I could be the best guardian possible when he returned. With my personal life destroyed, I threw myself into my career. I started seriously considering relocating somewhere I could start completely fresh, leaving all these painful memories behind. It was terrifying, but I knew I needed to move forward. I eventually moved out of my sister's apartment. She'd been incredible, helping me save money, providing emotional support, helping me rebuild my life. I relocated to Colorado and found a small house with a yard where Oliver could play when he returned. I'd saved enough to not worry about immediate employment and spent time job hunting, updating my professional credentials, and starting therapy to process everything. It wasn't easy, but I was determined to create a better life. I had to be strong for Oliver. That's exactly what I did. One day, while unpacking boxes, I found an old photo from a family camping trip years ago. Me, Vincent, and our parents all smiling around a campfire. I stared at that photo for a long time, remembering how close we'd once been. I realized that while my family had imploded, I still had the power to build something new for myself and Oliver. It was time to take control of our future and leave the betrayal behind. Story 7. My controlling boyfriend cheated on me, so I secretly quit my job that he forced me to take. He manipulated me into staying, and that was the worst mistake of my entire life. My boyfriend Trevor had always dreamed of running his own business, and about 8 months ago he finally manipulated me into quitting my marketing job to work for his struggling startup. I say manipulated because I loved my career, but he brainwashed me into believing that my purpose was to support his vision and that real partners sacrificed for each other. But this isn't why I quit his company. I was terrified of leaving my stable career, so when I started working for Trevor's tech startup, I turned to him constantly for reassurance. I'd message him throughout the day asking if I was doing things right. My anxiety was overwhelming, and sometimes I'd get short with him, snapping when he didn't respond quickly enough or criticizing his disorganized management style. I guess it became too much for him. He started distancing himself emotionally. Then he began staying at the office later and later. Eventually, I discovered he'd been having an affair with our graphic designer, Vanessa. Learning that Trevor was cheating on me while I'd sacrificed my entire career for his dream was the most devastating pain I'd ever experienced. I'd been working for his company for about 3 months at that point. The next morning, I drove to my old boss's office and begged for my position back. Miraculously, they'd just had someone quit and offered me my old role. I accepted on the spot. When I got home that evening, Trevor was waiting in the kitchen. I looked at him with barely contained rage. I asked him who Vanessa really was to him. He looked like a deer in headlights. It took him a moment to respond, but he claimed she was just an employee and accused me of being paranoid and going through his phone again. Earlier in our relationship, I'd caught Trevor messaging women on LinkedIn in ways that seemed inappropriate. He'd insisted it was just networking and that I was being insecure. We'd argued intensely about trust and boundaries. He'd made me feel like I was the problem for not trusting him. We'd even gone to couples therapy where the counselor suggested I work on my jealousy issues. Over the past couple years, our relationship had seemingly improved, but now the signs were impossible to ignore. He sounded exactly like before, defensive, gaslighting, accusing me of invading his privacy. I asked him why he'd convinced me to quit my job if he wasn't committed to us building something together. He said he'd been stressed with the business failing, and the pressure of having me depend on him had driven him into Vanessa's arms. He claimed she just understood the startup life in a way I never could. I took a deep breath and told him I'd gotten my old job back and was quitting his company. He exploded. He called me a traitor, ungrateful, selfish, every insult imaginable. He said I was sabotaging his business at its most vulnerable moment, that I knew how much he needed me, and I was destroying his dream out of spite. I told him he'd destroyed my trust. But he didn't care. He said, well, at least I didn't abandon the company we built together. He claimed I'd betrayed him worse than any affair ever could. I told him he was delusional, and he said he was leaving. Despite everything, I begged him to stay. I still loved him and believed deep down that he loved me too. But he stormed out. The next few days, I saw his family posting vicious things about me on social media. They called me every name he'd called me and more. They had the story completely twisted, claiming I'd quit Trevor's company out of laziness and greed, wanting to chase corporate money instead of supporting my partner's entrepreneurial journey. They painted me as the villain who'd abandoned him when he needed me most. Some harassed me through DMs and unknown numbers. I felt completely misunderstood and attacked. About 10 days later, Trevor called saying he'd ended things with Vanessa and wanted to work on our relationship. He said those days were behind him and apologized for his family's behavior. He'd asked them to delete their posts, and they eventually did. He also apologized for the name-calling and for pressuring me about the job. He said he understood why I'd left and it was no longer an issue. I was relieved to hear from him. Since he claimed to have changed, I believed him. Looking back, it's painfully obvious I was an idiot, but I fell for his manipulation again. We moved back in together the following week. Things seemed normal briefly. Then the pattern started again. Every time we argued, he'd bring up how I'd abandoned his business when he needed me most and storm out for days. His family would resume the online harassment. He'd eventually return with apologies, and the cycle would repeat. I kept forgiving him. I felt stupid, but I was in love. Every time I tried to move on, I'd remember our early days, the late nights planning his business together, the intimate conversations about our future, the excitement of building something meaningful. I convinced myself we could get back to that magic. I told myself the cheating was a one-time mistake caused by stress. I started doing even more to prove my commitment, helping with his business on evenings and weekends despite having my full-time job, constantly reassuring him, trying to keep him happy so he wouldn't look elsewhere. Each time he left, my family expressed relief. My sister kept telling me to end it for good. She'd say, "You're not married, you don't have kids, you're not financially tied to his failing business anymore. Just leave." I'd agree it would be easy to walk away, but I didn't think I'd ever feel this connected to anyone else. After another massive argument where Trevor got his family to post about my parents and my job, I was certain I was done. But before I could fully process it, Trevor showed up with tickets to Hawaii, to the same resort where we'd stayed when we first started dating. I initially said no, but he reminded me how magical that trip had been, how we'd fallen in love watching sunsets on that beach. I convinced myself this could reignite what we'd lost. Maybe we'd been fighting because we weren't making time for us anymore. This vacation could fix everything. I agreed. He took me to this beautiful beachfront resort for a long weekend. We ate incredible food, drank tropical cocktails, and enjoyed every moment together. He was attentive and loving in ways he hadn't been in months. I fell even deeper in love. I didn't know that was possible. He apologized profusely, said he'd taken me for granted, promised this time would be different. I believed every word. We lay on the beach watching sunsets, and everything felt perfect. Coming home felt bittersweet. I finally had the relationship I'd dreamed of, but I didn't want to leave that bubble where it was just us, no family drama, no outside distractions. A few weeks later, we argued about something trivial. I'd forgotten to pick up his dry cleaning. He exploded, told me I couldn't do anything right, and he should have known I'd be unreliable since I'd quit on him when his business needed me most. He brought up my leaving the company in every single argument. He'd tell me sweet things constantly to get back in my good graces, then weaponize my biggest regret against me. I was exhausted. Our wedding was scheduled for 5 months away. I wondered if I could marry someone who'd hold this grudge forever. I also wondered if maybe I should offer to work for his company again part-time to prove my commitment. He did his usual disappearing act for several days. Those days started feeling peaceful. I didn't feel trapped or insecure. I didn't worry about where he was or who he was with. I worked and came home to my quiet apartment. That simple life I'd once found boring became the peace I desperately needed. Then I saw his family's posts starting again. They began tagging me, saying hurtful things about how I'd sabotaged Trevor's business. The posts got increasingly personal and cruel. I tried ignoring them, knowing Trevor would show up soon with apologies. But then one post went viral. It exploded from 30 likes to 300 to over 5,000. My DMs filled with strangers attacking me without knowing the full story. People said I was a terrible partner, greedy, selfish, that I deserved to be alone. Some messages were threats from people saying I represented everything wrong with modern relationships, women who wouldn't sacrifice for their men. I felt horrible. His family leaked my home address in the viral post's comments. People began showing up at my apartment. Someone spray-painted "quitter" on my car. Someone left threatening notes in my mailbox. I was terrified to leave home, convinced I might be harmed. People posted my phone number and workplace in the comments. My phone rang constantly with hateful calls. I had to change my number. I was too frightened to go anywhere in case someone recognized me from the viral post. Then my boss called my new number asking about the situation. He asked if the claims in the viral post were true. I explained my side, and he said he needed to see me first thing the next morning. I was terrified Trevor had cost me my job. When I went to the office, thankfully no one harassed me. I sat across from my boss and practically begged to keep my position. After hearing my explanation, he agreed I could stay on probation for 90 days. Driving home, I saw Trevor's car in my parking spot. It took everything not to smash into it. He was standing there holding roses and a gift bag. As I got out, I walked past him without acknowledging him. He followed me inside, immediately launching into apologies. I told him he'd gone too far and if he didn't leave in 30 seconds, I was calling the police. He got angry and said I didn't deserve him anyway. He talked about all the women who'd love to be with him, how I was throwing away everything good we'd shared. I knew this manipulation tactic well. I stood my ground, slammed the door in his face, and called the cops. He banged on the door, screaming threats for what felt like hours. When police arrived, I showed them documentation of the cyberbullying and harassment. They arrested him. I was proud of myself for finally standing up to this man who'd given me crumbs of affection while systematically destroying my self-worth. His family came to collect his belongings. They called me names, and I told them if they continued, I'd press charges against them too. They immediately went silent and left. I ended up breaking my lease and moving in with my best friend, Amanda. She helped me heal. Things slowly improved. With support from loved ones, I rebuilt the confidence that had been eroding throughout my relationship with Trevor. Eventually, I got promoted at work and started making excellent money. I began taking vacations with friends and family. I traveled to places Trevor had always dismissed as not worth the money. Initially, I was angry with myself for wasting years with Trevor and constantly disrespecting myself by staying. But through therapy, I learned to redirect the love I'd poured into him back into myself. I learned that real love doesn't require sacrificing your career, your peace, or your self-respect.